like to thank Patrick and Kadena for having us here and giving us an opportunity. We're here because we felt we needed to, and because it's our second anniversary. Toronto was the very first place I spoke. What you're going to hear is almost a story that none of you would like to relate to. I'd like for none of you to believe it because it's so horrible. I'd like everyone in this room to look further and research everything that you hear. Because the stuff I'm going to tell you is going to be classified. I'm a foreign intelligence officer with the Central Intelligence Agency and some other agencies. There's about 14 of them now, and there's about 7 of them then. The stuff I want to tell you about is right in your face, just like Roseanne said. That's the best kept secret. And I practice that in my own home. When I have confidential stuff I don't particularly want anybody getting into it, I place it all over the house, right where you can see it. But it's not in a place you can listen for. That is an old trick that magicians use. The closer you get, the less you see. There's a movie out right now called Now You've Seen It. I would strongly urge each and every one of you to see it. Because one of the characters that plays in that part is doing exactly what I was trained to do. Everything that he does, I was trained to do. People with the Central Intelligence Agency, I'm talking about field people, officers, they're trained to become the best liars on earth. Their body language, the micro muscles around their eyes, the blood pressure building in the earlobes, hand movements, eye movements, everything is formulated. That was one of the reasons that I was able to get out of the lie. Because the powers that be said, nobody's going to believe an old spook. Nobody. Particularly when he's talking about something as horrific as trauma-based mind control. I'll give you a little introduction of myself. I became involved with the intelligence community, I suppose, the way that most people do. You can, of course, CIA is an equal opportunity employer, and if you've got a degree, you can go down and apply, and you can get a job if they have an opening. I strongly advise against it. You guys are in Canada, you need to stay here. Don't go down there. All right. Thank you. The training I had began, I suppose, before age 5. I came from a wealthy family, and my father was very abusive, and because he had money and stature in the community, the state, well, in the country, nobody looked. I had one or two teachers that did. But now I'm going to tell you something. I couldn't talk until I was about 19. And what better person to hire as an intelligence officer than somebody that can't talk? I lived inside my head. I learned how to read people. And I was being prepared my whole life and never knew it. My father had no concept that I would be drafted. Well, I was drafted into the military during Vietnam. And when I went down to get my final papers and go through my physical, There were about 3,000 or 4,000 guys in this one huge aviation hangar in Montgomery, Alabama. I moved my draft board around from state to state. Alabama was the last state. So that was the end of the road for me. I'm from Tennessee. They called out my name, and you could have heard a pin drop, and everybody was looking around. They said, would Margaret Phillips please come to the front of the road? And I knew that I was in trouble. Then they said, would Margaret Ewing Phillips please come to the front of the road? Well, I got up, and it's the biggest mass laughter I've ever heard in my life. 3,000 guys just screaming with laughter. And I was embarrassed, you can imagine. And I went into this room with a bunch of military brass and guys with suits sitting around a big long table. And the military brass told me, they said, you're not suitable for this man's army. How do you feel about that? And he said, do you not feel any allegiances or something to that effect to your country? But he said, you're going to see these guys. They've got a job for you. And I looked at him, and it looked like businessmen. Very somber, but they looked like businessmen to me. So one of them pulled me to the side. He said, this is an old Hollywood trick, but don't call us, we'll call you. And he handed me a business card. And it said Defense Intelligence Agency. I thought, these guys are really idiots. They think I'm intelligent. Somebody's mixed it up, and I'm just hoping the war will be over before they find out. Well, I went home, and nothing happened. And so I was driving a tow motor for the Grinnell Corporation until I drove one off the side and it went down, and I jumped off, and it landed on the railroad tracks and cost the company a lot of money. And so I started job hunting. And I made up my own resume, and you would have thought that I just had graduated a Rhodes Scholar. I thought, I can't be in any more trouble than I am right now because I have no money, I have nothing. Make a long story short, the first job interview that I had, I got it. I'd gone in to see a recruiter that someone, and I can't recall who, even if I knew who it was, I probably didn't, told me to go see. I went and saw her, and she was looked as though she was expecting me. And she told me, she said, first of all, we need to work with you and where your communication skills are better. Your stuttering is terrible. Yeah. It had been really good. I'd seen a speech therapist before that. And I think I was 20 at the time. She said, what would you like to do? I said, I would like to do something that I do best. And she said, what is it? I said, I don't know, that's why I'm here. She said, all right. How would you feel about working in the music business? Well, that's not bad. I'm a violinist. Yeah, okay. Music industry, good. She said, well, how would you feel about being an engineer? Oh, Jesus. I said, ma'am, I can't do this. I can't even make this. I said, I've got things on the resume that's so fake that if you check it out, you make me leave right now. She said, I know all about your resume, and I know who you are. I said, how do you know what I am? She said, you'll find out later. She said, but you got to see some psychologists and some psychiatrists, and you're going to be tested. She said, we're going to pay you while you do this. For 3 months, the least was once, the most was 5 times a week I was tested. Actually, by really just 2 different psychologists and psychiatrists. The questions that they posed me, it didn't take me long to figure out that they were just rewording the same question. I thought, well, that's odd. On this, why would I be joining the intelligence community? So after going through that little ordeal, I went back to the headhunter, as they're called in the States, and I asked her, I said, why am I taking the same test over and over? And she said, just a minute. So she calls the psychologist. It happened to be the one I liked. She said, he's 2 miles down the road, go down there and talk to him. If you get there in 15 minutes, you can have a half hour. So I went in to see him and I said, Doctor, I said, I have a question. What is this all about? I said, I'm really getting nervous. I said, months have gone by, and I don't even know what I'm applying for. He said, okay, you're going to be working for the Ampex Corporation. I said, who is that? He said, they invented the instant replay. They refined videotape and audio tape, and audio recorders and video recorders, TV equipment, cameras, you name it, they've done it. They serve the military-industrial complex of this country. You're going to be working with it. And you'll be working as an engineer, not in the capacity of working with numbers. That's fortunate. I said, well, what kind of engineer am I going to be? She said, probably a marketing engineer. I said, why? Why do they call them engineers? She said, some companies like to call everybody engineers. And I want to tell you something. File this one away. If you've got somebody you're suspicious of, and they say they are retired engineers, trust me. A, you don't retire from the intelligence community. B, you're probably not an engineer. I actually have a friend who is retired from the intelligence community, not from the U.S. or Canada. He lives in Canada. He's got a Canadian passport. Well, he doesn't live here anymore, but he used to. Matter of fact, he owns property right here in this city. He's indeed retired. But he never saw the stuff I saw, because what they told me was, they said, you're going to get to live your life's dream. I said, and what's that? They said, you were interested in becoming a doctor, to learn more about how you could help your mother. So I was riding, when I was like 6 years old, I was riding on a horse with my mother. And suddenly she was fainting, fell off. The horse stepped into her head. And she was not the most perfect mother before that horse stepped in her head. Afterwards, she was incredibly difficult to be around. And I was about the only one that had any compassion for her. My sister detested her, and my father detested her. And I felt sorry for her. And I really wanted to help her, because I knew there was a nice person underneath all of that. I don't know how I knew it. I was so young, but I knew it. I just knew it. Well, I said, okay, how did you know to pick me? I said, when I went to Ampex, the boss there that I met with showed me a stack of applications that he said contained, it was what, 740 or something, astronomical figure. I've got it written down, I've got the correct figure somewhere. And I said, and you're picking me out of all these graduates from engineering school and everything. And the psychologist told me something. He said, you remember when you were, say around, let's see, I would have been about 9 years old. I would have been in about grade, in grade school. Do you remember them coming in and giving everybody in there tests? I said, sure. I do remember those tests. Some of the questions I didn't even understand. A lot of them. I said, and then the next year, another battery of tests. All the way up until the 8th grade, when most people were entering puberty. I said, what about those tests? They said, the United States government learned a lot after World War II about how minds actually work. And they began to understand how to select people for certain jobs because they knew how my mind worked. And because I lived in my head, I was a perfect candidate. I was fiercely independent. And even after I was hired and I needed a job so bad, I was making more money than anybody I knew. Anybody. And I thought, oh my God, I can't give up all this, but I just can't work with anybody. And they put me with person after person after person, and I faked it the best I could. I really didn't enjoy working with anybody. So they said, well, we found out something. What's that? They said, you really do a good job by yourself. You do not work well with anybody. They said, well, now you demonstrate. Now, you're going to get to do what you want to do if you're working by yourself. The unfortunate part about it is, if there's a mistake made, you did it. And in this business, it may be your last mistake. Well, I had already learned enough about the others for me to know they're not all benevolent people. And I learned that the area that I would be doing was mind sciences. My dream come true. I was in places like Emory University. I was for the astronaut, the Harry ones, that is, the aides, they were training to fly rocket ships for NASA because NASA was afraid that we were going to have a catastrophe like the Russians did, and they would defund NASA. So they had these monkeys ready to take over. That's like training a 2-year-old to drive a Ferrari. It's not a good idea. Monkeys are real smart, not that smart. So I thought, well, the government isn't that smart either. They're throwing a lot of money away. If they did actually teach us one gorilla, I'll take that back. One gorilla. It's a rhesus monkey. They taught this rhesus monkey sign language. I thought, wow, that's impressive. So I studied American Sign Language enough to where I could communicate with it. And I went back and talked to this monkey. And it was a whole new world opened up for me. Right there. Now, that monkey's got emotion. Monkey's got logic. He is just a little hairier and his arms are a little longer. So I thought, wow, that's really, really good. And as I went along, I got to oversee all types of mind sciences experiments. The people I worked with, yes, many of them had a real problem speaking English. They came over under Project Paperclip. Project Paperclip was a very bad thing because the Defense Department promised Congress they wouldn't bring in any Nazis. Well, the fact of the matter is, unless you became a Nazi, or worse, SS, you could not keep your job as a scientist. You're going to die working for Hitler. So you had a choice. Either get to do what you like to do, which is build rockets or work in mind sciences, so that you didn't have to have institutions or prisons anymore. Everybody could be happy and could be productive. They wouldn't be under some sort of mind control, except their own. I thought, wow. And people with brain damage, they could reroute the neurons. compartments in their brains. And these people were just normal. Whoa. I saw all this. I saw technologies that I never saw again for 35 years. I knew that we were, the intelligence community and science, military science, was 25 years ahead of everything. Can you imagine if you removed everything in your lives right now that has been created in the last 25 years, what you would have left? Let's go back 50 years, because I found out it was actually 50 years. Remove everything that's been introduced to the public over the past 50 years. You probably ought to be sitting on the floor. Then I found out that technologies were indeed progressing at a much more rapid rate. And by the mid-'80s, I became scared. I genuinely became scared. I didn't want to be a part of anything anymore. I just wanted to live my life out and get away from it. You can't do that. I think I'm not one in believing in fate, but I gave up on believing in things that happen for no purpose at all. Everything that happens in your life is for some good reason. So, moving forward in time, in the mid-'80s, I was approached by, I might mention this too. I got transferred around a lot. They moved me from one position to another. I was a vice president for 2 different airlines, and both of them were formed by former Air America executives and pilots. Some of them came from Evergreen Aviation. These names you can look up. And by the way, if you look up Roger Paperclip, you'll find me, my job description, Washington correspondent that wrote a book about it. And I was a bad guy. I wasn't a bad guy. I'm not just saying that like a prisoner. I'm telling you, everything was so compartmentalized, I had no idea what was going on. I didn't know that I was still working for the CIA. Capital International Airways. My God. I look on my cap, it says CIA. I thought, man, I gotta be an idiot. But the one thing that followed me throughout my working career was my employee number. Everywhere I went, and I still have my old employee records. They didn't get them all. Everywhere I went, I got an employee card and a ramp card. Because in aviation, you've got to have a ramp ID in order to get out of the ramp with a plane somewhere. I had a number. My employee number was impossible because I went to work for Airlines, and my employee number was 008. I thought, well, this is going to be really funny. And it was. The people that worked in accounting, when my paycheck got messed up, got misdirected or something, they said, where'd you get that number? And I said, no. I've always had it. And they'd always look at me like I had lobsters crawling out my ears. Fact was, that was their joke and not mine. Fact is, I was in situations that brought Albert Broccoli into my office when I was working for Capital. He flew his drone across the pond and went to see my boss. My boss called me in. He said, I want you to meet a friend of mine. Okay? He was that fellow. He said, this is Albert Broccoli. What a name. And he said, do you know him? I said, no, sir. I do not. He said, have you ever seen the James Bond movie? I said, No, sir, not. My boss was, he wanted me to lie. I didn't lie because somebody asked me to saw a movie. Okay. Well, he asked me questions, not about what I do, but what would I do if. And it wasn't until probably a decade and a half later that I saw a James Bond film, and I saw what I did, what I told him that I would do if I was in that situation. I saw exactly, well, I'll be damned. I'll be damned. I couldn't believe it. At that point, I knew that I really was getting to see something that maybe most folks didn't get to see. And everything I had was dependent upon my performance, much like an entertainer. Roseanne Barr is one of the dearest friends we have, and we don't have many friends. For their sake and for ours. We live very much like two recluses. We travel the world. And very once in a while, Kathy will meet somebody on the internet, or she'll meet them somewhere. She's known Davina and Patrick for 7 years. I didn't know they even know their names. But she'd been dealing with them and working with them for 7 years. And she said, Mark, I really would like to do the meeting. And I never knew she was talking about this, because I had sworn off any more public presentations. Part was, though, that the information needs to be out. And now we're into the second, and maybe even the third generation of people that were talking. When Kathy and I started in 1991, speaking to psychiatrists, psychologists, judges, lawyers, they said you can't use the words mind control. There's no such thing. You can't control the mind. Wait a minute. The reason I'm here is because of mind control. The reason I'm here is because I was invited to become the president of a very large corporation, working with the People's Republic of China, building giant capacity systems so that they could maintain their output in their mines. And since everything is made out of metal in China is run by the military, they had checked in. So when I was approached by this fellow by the name of Alex Houston in Nashville, Tennessee, an MC, supposed comedian, he's not a comedian, that's a comedian. He was somebody that just, I could tell that he was a habitual liar. I mean, I knew that within 1 second. I'm also a graphologist. I saw his handwriting. Oh, jeez. You wouldn't sleep in the same room with this guy in any circumstances. Plus, I found out about his sexual preferences after I rescued Kathy, and I know I did sleep in the same room with him one time. And I've been re-examined.